Hello, everybody. We're here with Bryan Cothorn. He's joining us from Washington, D.C., I assume. Is that correct?
Baltimore, actually, about
Oh, Baltimore.
45 minutes north of Washington, D.C.
All right, perfect. Thank you so much for joining us. And I contacted you to be on the show because I wanted to talk a little bit about the Northern League here in the U.S., which is the longest running league for handball in the U.S., if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
It it is. The league has been in operation since it was organized in 2008 and came in operation in 2009. So you take away the pandemic years, and you've got about a good 14, 15 seasons of league activity there.
All right, perfect. But before we get to that, I wanted to get to know you a little bit more because I've seen you for many years in tournaments and in events, but I never actually get to know your history of who you are and how you got involved with handball. So give us a little bit of that information. Who is
Okay.
Bryan Cothorn and how you got involved with handball?
Okay. So let's see. I'm born, mostly raised in Baltimore. Uh, this is going to be a bit of a different story than I think you've heard ever. When I was in the third grade, my gym teacher played handball in upstate New York. I want to say Ithaca College at the time. I'm not completely sure about that. I was 8 at the time, so I don't really remember.
Yeah.
But he played handball, and he created a dedicated unit out of his schedule for all of his classes dedicated to team handball. And he got everyone excited about team handball. He knew the rules of team handball. Everyone was raring and itching and roaring to play. And I got sick and was out of school for 2 weeks. I come back to school and the unit is almost completely over. It's the last day of the unit. I'm not exactly cleared to participate at all. So I'm bummed. All of my classmates had a blast playing it. So I kept bothering. I kept pestering him. Well, can we play this again in the future? Can we do something after school? Can we set up something with the local rec center, which is a thing that is very much tied to the school system in Baltimore? And after years and years and years of pestering, he finally said, "Hey, if you really, really want to play this, since you have some connections to the rec center, why don't you reach out to the U.S. Team Handball Federation, as it was known at the time, and try and get some information?"
Hmm.
So a couple years passed, and I remember, and I thought back, and I progressed in my youth basketball career, and I said, I don't really like basketball. So I reach out to the Federation. I remember back to our conversations with this gym teacher, Linda Lisa Severo, who is a name that if you were involved in handball in the US in the 90s, you know well, reached out to me, gave me some information to get started. We were able to do some youth stuff at my rec center, not as much as I would like. Ultimately, I keep going in my academic career and I graduate from high school and I head to college. And the DC Diplomats had just formed the year prior. John Ryan and company had gotten together. They were practicing in their finding factors facilities. They were practicing in Arlington at Thomas Jefferson Middle School, which has a full-size court basically.
Nice.
And yeah, they were practicing every Sunday. So there I was, freshman in college, and I was trucking from College Park, Maryland to Arlington, Virginia for practices. And then I got sick. I'm not going to say exactly what happened, but there was some medical situations which got in the way. And all of a sudden, that really put an end on my ability to come to practices for a while.
Mhm.
DC kept progressing with John Ryan and then later with Marketa Kromkova and a whole bunch of other individuals, Derek Brown. Ultimately, at one point in time, they won 2 national championships. Uh, I'm in and out at times. I'm trying my best to stay active, stay involved, but I can't really stay that involved.
Mhm.
And ultimately, after the 2005 national championship, the club stopped practicing, lost the gym, lost everything. The organization was practically gone.
Mhm.
So now I'm in college and now I'm cleared and I can't practice. I go and I finish college because we didn't necessarily have the infrastructure there to build a college team. And I thinking, what do I do after college? Naturally, I go on Jeopardy. I lose on Jeopardy, but that doesn't matter. That's not important because the team was practicing. The Olympics had gotten Trinity College in DC to want to start practicing or have a clinic, and from there we were able to build the DC club once again. And we practiced in some very not handball friendly facilities for a
Hmm.
while until we found our current home in Montgomery County. And from there, the club has just progressed from there from 2010 onwards. See, I stepped down as president of DC in 2014. And at that time, I pretty much focused on being deputy commissioner of the Northeast Handball League, the NTHL.
Hmm.
Following that, I got mad at my team one day, which is something you don't really want to do. And I decided one day I'm just going to go to college nationals because, I just want to be in a situation where I'm not in charge of something. So I go to college nationals and Mike Cavanaugh sees me and says, "Hey, Bryan, you're here. Excellent. We need somebody to take care of the live streaming,
Yeah.
the entire live streaming for the entire college nationals." I, I do that. I say, "Okay, that was fun." Nationals is a month later. Okay, that was fun. And pretty much that's how I got started on this track where you see me at nationals, whether it's doing the live streaming or what I'm really doing now, which is the competition management, stats inventory, collaborating with the NRC, with the referees and technical delegates, and making sure the tournament runs as smoothly as it can be.
Okay, awesome. And are you still involved with the Northern League?
Yes, yes. I am now commissioner of the Northeast League. That happened over the pandemic. Um, Jan O'Shea passed away a few years ago, and
Hmm.
so I stepped up with the help of the O'Shea family, and now I'm in charge of pretty much all league operations.
All right. So let's go back to where the league started.
Okay.
I don't know if you were involved at that time, but how did it got started and how it got formed?
Okay, so I'm going to have to preface this with a bit of an information dump. Not that I haven't done that already. Back in 2006, 2007, USA Team Handball was decertified. Why it was decertified, not important.
Yeah.
There was a new USA Team Handball organization in place in 2008. That would be the Steve Pastorino, Dieter Esch era. And at that time, one of Steve Pastorino's goals was to have a regional manager in each region, one in the Northeast, one in the Southeast, one in the Midwest, Southwest, West, all with well-defined borders and boundaries. Uh, Pastorino's organization was able to hire two regional managers, Brian Finley in the West and Dominique Dumas in the Northeast and Southeast. And it was Dominique who liaison with the original teams
Hmm.
in the Northeast League. That would be New York, Boston, New York Athletic Club, and Army West Point Black
Okay.
to have regular competition where the teams aren't necessarily playing 5 games over 2 days.
Right.
They're able to play more often. They're able to play on a monthly schedule so that they're not waiting at that time 2, 3, 4 months for the next tournament.
Okay.
At that time, there were pretty much only two tournaments you go to plus nationals. And this way, you're able to play more often
Hmm.
with less of a physical load on your athletes, less taxing towards the athletes,
Hmm.
and you were able to complete your schedule that way.
Okay. So the first season, then it was four teams playing once a month. Is that how it was organized?
Yeah, they were playing once a month for, I believe it was October, November, and then February, March.
Okay.
That first season, New York Athletic Club, Boston, Army West Point Black, and New York City. Army West Point Black was gracious enough to, I think, host three of the match days, two or three.
Okay.
And we had, I believe, the fourth match day was either in Boston or New York City itself. New York City won the league that first year. Big shock. Uh, for being perfectly honest.
Yeah.
No one could have seen that coming. But yeah, Dominique had organized the league operations there and named Jan the inaugural commissioner, and she was able to handle the finances for that league. And there were a couple international refs who were based out of the New York area, so everything just kind of logically fell into place that first season.
All right, perfect. And how did it evolve year after year? Like it was always growing little by little? Because I know now you guys, or I don't know if this season, but a few seasons ago, you guys have like even two divisions and then men and women. So how did it evolve into getting that big?
So after every season or so, we had other teams say, "Well, we want to play more often too. We like what's going on here," that sort of thing. DC was one of those teams, and at one point in time, Army said, "Well, we want our gold guys, our JV guys,
Right.
to get some more game time as well." And then you had Divine Jackson, uh, who I hope you're enjoying this holiday season, Divine, if you watch this. Divine Jackson had his youth team basically that had grown up together in Long Island.
Mm-hmm.
And so these three teams decided, well, if we want to put this in the league structure, you can make a D2 here with just these teams.
Right.
And so we had a D2. Boston was able to provide a second team. DC won the first audition of D2 and was given the option to move up to D1 because they had proven that they were capable.
Mm-hmm.
And then we had other teams that came in over the years. We had a New York City 3 team that came in into that D2 structure. We moved Army West Point Gold and that New York City 2 team up to the first division because they were outclassing everyone else in D2.
Mm-hmm.
And it kept evolving to that point where on the men's side, we had multiple second divisions leading into a first division. We had a D at one point in time we had a D2 North, which was Penn State, New York City 3, Boston 3, Long Island Tigers, SSC, you name it, they were
Mm-hmm.
there. You had a D2 South, which had the University of Virginia and James Madison and DC Ambassadors. At one point in time, the DC Silencers, the club team that was the feeder team for the Deaf National team,
Mm-hmm. Okay.
were all in the D2 South. And at one point in time, we had a D2 West, which had Pittsburgh, uh, University of Pittsburgh.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, Penn State was in that for a while as well. Ohio State was in that for a year. And we had West Virginia University slash Kuwaiti Student Union, who were all a team. That kind of led into what JD and company are doing now in Ohio
Mm-hmm.
with I guess it's called the Ohio League, and now it's now called the Columbus League, and a little bit of Trailblazer itself.
Yeah.
Uh, right now, we have a second division in the South. Coming back from the pandemic, James Madison, Johns Hopkins, DC Ambassadors, and I said Johns Hopkins, UVA are all playing that D2 South together. We wanted to try and have a D2 North this season, but we had some communication issues with one or two clubs, so we weren't really able to bring together Olin and Cortland and maybe some of the other teams, Ottawa, Toronto,
Mm-hmm.
New York City 3 together, make a D2 North this year. But that's something to aspire for in the future.
Okay. So let's talk a little bit about the organization of all this. So you mentioned you have one D1 and then several D2 that are more regional, correct?
Yes.
And do you have like a cap of how many teams do you want on D1, or it's just depending on the level?
It depends on the level. If you're showing that you're above the level of a D2 team and you're willing to make the commitment that D1 requires, then the option is there for you to move up to D1.
Okay.
Uh, on the women's side, it's right now it's all one division.
Right.
Up until last year or so, we did have two subdivisions in one league, one for club teams and one for college teams.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And when you say about the commitments that the D1 requires, is that just traveling longer distance, or is there something else there?
It's partially traveling to make your match days.
Mm-hmm.
For the most part, we won't ask you to travel more than 4.5 hours away from your home location. Like Boston and would never go to DC, and DC would never go to Boston unless strange situations occurred, for example.
Mm-hmm.
We want to make sure that that you have the capacity to host a match day, pretty much.
Okay.
Every team, that's been one of the things from the beginning, is that every team has the capacity to host a match day, whether or not you can that season. And that's something that's been very helpful from a logistics standpoint
Hmm.
from the start.
Okay, so every team that wants to be part of D1 needs to be able to host one of these match days
Yeah.
and then go and travel when they need to play away, correct?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
And we have a whole preseason back and forth where we will go to the clubs and say, hey, you're sure you can make like this trip is a trip that you can make. For example, James Madison, you're sure you can make a trip to New York City.
Hmm.
Okay, good, good. DC, Boston, I got it. We understand. And we will work on that in the preseason and have a schedule that, knock on wood, doesn't change during the season.
All right. So in that, how do you get to the schedule? Like you know already which cities are gonna host each month. Is still once a month, or now that you have more teams, you need to make it more frequent. How do you organize that?
Well, we know around the general time of year that each team would host. We know that, for example, West Point would host in the fall, ideally when the football team is either away or idle. And that
Okay.
has to do with logistics, with getting on campus, and a whole bunch of things that only matter if you're trying to access a service academy as a civilian.
Hmm. Okay.
Uh, we know that New York City tends to host in January, early February. Boston likes February. BC likes March, April, although they really rather prefer moving to November.
Okay. So each team has their particular time of year that they want to host. So you kind of had the season already planned year after year, right? You just repeat what you were able to do before.
For the most part, yeah, like most one of the biggest challenges that you have is just making sure that the days are locked in, pretty much, and that there are no conflicts. This season, I think, was the first season in three where we've named a match day, and then Denver didn't come in right after us and say, "Well, the Somala Cup
Right.
is that same weekend." So there's a whole bunch of that requires extra planning and
Hmm.
extra organization and extra knowledge gaining, which is why I have the master schedule spreadsheet that I send out to teams every fall.
Hmm. Okay. And each day that you have an event, right? How many games do you schedule? How many women and men game? How long do you need a gym for? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So the teams right now, until they vote otherwise, wanted 2 by 30.
Okay.
So we set aside 90 minutes per game, and it's pretty much we're limiting teams right now to 2 games per match day. So
Okay.
Uh, pretty much that just means it's just taking the number of teams who are there, multiplying by two, and that's the number of games, multiplying that by 90 minutes, and that's the total minute need per day.
Okay. But so you always saying every team to the same city, or just a few teams travel there for the match day?
All depends on the match day. For example, the first match day of the season that we had in West Point, New York Athletic Club, I guess New York Athletic Club 2 was off for that match day. So they were able to stay home and they know that they are traveling to the other 4 match days, pretty much West Point, New York, Boston, DC.
Okay. And the
And
schedule then is announced at the beginning of the season, or the teams have a say on where and when they go?
they have a say as to when, where, and when they would host, but the schedule is tried there's an attempt to make the schedule as complete as possible before before a season begins, before an invoice is generated, before anything else happens. We try to have that full schedule there available so that every team, every player, if they check the schedule, knows exactly what's coming up
Hmm.
and exactly where and when and how many and how much it would cost.
Okay, perfect. And before we go to the cost, because I wanted to talk a little bit about that too, like, is the match day just one day, or you go the entire weekend, Saturday and Sunday?
We like right now we've had say men's match day on one day of the weekend and the women's match day on the other day of the weekend. So
Mm,
if say for example Boston would like their women to play on Saturday at their home match day, then we'll have the women's match day on Saturday and the men's match day on Sunday in Boston.
Okay.
Sometimes there's an overlap if there's a very unique situation.
Okay, that's good. That's good. Now, going back to the costs, like how much does a team need to pay if they want to participate in the league, and what that payment covers?
Okay. So pretty much we when we send our invoices for the season, we itemize every item and how much we're budgeting for that season. And we have the big costs, referee and referee travel. We have the cost of the athletic trainers for each match day estimated. And thankfully on college campuses and that is usually not at cost,
Mm-hmm.
which is great for us and great for the athletes. And then we'll have any other additional costs that are set aside for the season right there. Pretty much, you know that at the start, no matter what, it's going to cost at minimum 80 a game for the number of games that you're playing during the season. That's just because of the ref fees. Anything after that is based off ATC costs and travel costs.
Okay. So each team then gets are in charge of renting the gym and covering the cost of renting the gym, or is that something that all the teams collaborate on?
That's something each team is responsible for at the start of the
Okay.
season. We don't add that cost to the total because one, that is a indefatigably big number that does not sit well for anybody. And two, that gives each team the flexibility to look and find the best overall deal for them.
Okay, sounds good. So the teams, the only thing they pay is for the referees' expenses and the ATs,
The
correct?
referees, the ATCs, any other miscellaneous costs which might occur, which for the most part is that's pretty much it. Referees and trainers.
Okay, but they all need to be USA Team Handball members, right? Or that's separate from the federation.
They, since we are sanctioned by USA Team Handball, everyone does need to be a USA Team Handball member and go through that process.
Okay, perfect. Okay, sounds good. And then talking a little bit about the history of the league. Do you have an idea of how many times each team have won the league and the divisions, or is still you need to look it up to remember?
I don't know the exact number
Okay.
because, the previous few years have been a little, I try not to think about it.
Okay.
But yeah, I can pretty much tell you that in D1, New York City has won the league every single time.
Oh, okay.
They've yet to lose the league. In fact, they've lost only I think 3 or 4 games in the league's history, which is really impressive, and it's very notable whenever a team even so much as ties New York City.
Hmm.
Uh, DC has tied New York City, I believe, once. West Point Black has beaten New York City twice. Boston has beaten New York City once, and that's the entire list.
And Nyack is not participating in the league, or because you mentioned it?
New York Athletic Club is participating in the league, but it is the New York Athletic Club, from what I understand, is in a weird place right now.
Hmm.
Sorry, New York Athletic Club. So there's like, from what I understand, there's two different leaders for two different teams. You
Mm.
have the New York Athletic Club team, which you might recognize, and I think that's led by Hadi Al Saeed.
Hmm.
Uh, and they're the ones that you saw in Chicago.
Okay.
And you also have basically a mix of Long Island Tigers and SSC players and other players in Connecticut from the Connecticut United team that's starting to form. And they've all come together to be New York Athletic Club, I guess, two right now.
Okay.
And they're the ones that are playing in the league.
Oh, okay. Sounds good. And on the women's side, you
On the
say
women's side, New York City has won the league 10 and a half times.
oh,
Uh, 2020. Uh,
so. What is the half there?
yeah, 2020.
Okay.
The league didn't finish. Boston and New York City were one goal apart basically the entire season. It was going to come down to one game between the two in March 2020,
Hmm.
which didn't happen for
Oh,
very obvious reasons.
yeah.
So they split the league title there. New York City has 10 and a half women's league titles. Boston has one. Army West Point Black has one,
Mm,
which is a
mm,
fun story.
yeah.
And DC has one.
Okay. So it's more representation there. And
Yeah,
do you remember all the D2 ones, or is that too difficult?
I can think I can do that.
Okay.
Okay. So D2 West, the one season we had D2 West, West Virginia won.
Okay.
D2 South has had four different winners: DC Ambassadors, Penn State, University of Virginia, and James Madison. D2 North has had four winners, uh, five winners,
Hmm.
4.5 winners. Long Island Tigers have won once. Boston 2 has won once. Philly has shared a title with New York City 3, and New York City 3 also has another title. So they have 1.5. And overall in D2, and Army West Point Gold has two titles, hence why they moved up.
Hmm.
DC Diplomats has one title. DC Silencers, that's the Deaf National Team
Hmm.
club team, has a title. Long Island Tigers have two titles. DC Ambassadors, that's DC Diplomats' second team, has a title. And West Virginia has a title.
All right. So, and this list has been going then for like 15, 16 years now?
Since the 2009-2010 season, yeah.
Okay. So, pretty remarkable. I think we all can learn from this. And pointing towards that, like if other people want to start their league in the region, they have several teams nearby. I don't know if you remember if you were part of that or if they told you, but what were the problems of getting the league going, and especially the first few seasons? How were those problems tackled to make sure that the league could keep going and not just die because one team didn't want it to travel or something like that?
Yeah. Uh, the first thing that the teams in the league did was they were in open communication with
Mm-hmm.
each other, and that's kind of one of the key facets that maybe isn't touched upon, or maybe people will even want me to touch upon, is that ultimately, in the end, we're friends.
Mm-hmm.
There are people on New York who are friends with people on DC, who are friends with people in Boston, who are friends with people on Philly. There's no the tribalism that can exist in sport starts at the first whistle and ends at the final whistle, and after that, it does not and should not exist. And from that end, there's always a spirit of cooperation and communication openly with each other. And I think that was set by Jan at the start
Mm-hmm.
and by asking the teams to really engage in the process and with each other to meet our goals, and that is playing handball regularly. Um, from the start, I'm going to say some things which maybe aren't as known. The Pastorino era uh, pledged to cover the referees for the first 3 years of the league,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of a big deal since there wasn't much in terms of travel, since all of the matches at that time were pretty much in New York, and there were, again, two IHF international referees based in New York, Monica Sutton and Gosia Golis Zelabak Golis, my apologies. Since they were both there in New York, it was pretty much just the mileage wasn't that much of an issue. It was making sure that they were there. Uh, at one point in time, I believe they both stopped refereeing due to their life situations. So there was a need to find more referees and the need to build more referees. And at that time, we had Bruce Mossberg, who recently passed away, was instrumental in coming back home, I guess, to the New York area and providing clinics every few years to help replenish our referee pool. That was one of the biggest issues. That's still a big issue even now. We were doing pretty well in that regard up until the pandemic. We had, I think, 60 level one referees in the region,
Mm-hmm.
and post-pandemic, that number dwindled to about 15 or so. In those early seasons, let's see, those early seasons, we did have an issue with, say, one of the teams not necessarily wanting to cooperate as fully as the others.
Mm-hmm.
And they made the decision to not stay in the league at that time, but they were still a founding member and they were still helpful and instrumental and communicative in being involved. And in a sense, they did help other teams in that area and they still help to this day. which is fine because they have a different path.
Hmm.
And that's a path that they wanted to take, and it was good for everybody to make that split. At times, we have issues with logistics because one thing or another thing didn't happen. And when that happens, again, we go back to that spirit of open communication and we talk to each other and we
Hmm.
try and find solutions with each other. And that's how we keep going. That's how we survive. Do I think that necessarily can apply to every region in the United States right now? No. Northeast is pretty lucky that everyone's pretty much one train ride away from each other.
Right.
Uh, like I say, DC doesn't travel to Boston, Boston doesn't travel to DC. That is a 6.5 hour drive, basically, which I understand is nothing compared to say Cal Heat to LA to play
Well,
LA
it's
or to
all it's almost
play.
the same. Yeah, yeah.
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 It's definitely not the same for Cal Heat to say Portland or Seattle.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah.
So, and it's not necessarily you don't necessarily have the parameters in place to do that everywhere in the country. So, I guess if I were to give a takeaway to say other regions in the country that wanted to do this is to look at the parameters you have and look at the people you have in your region and really engage with not just the clubs that you want to bring in and try and make this happen, but also the players on those clubs and see what it would take to buy in, they need to buy in, and maybe you need to adjust. Maybe you need to look at a different solution and work together to find that solution that works best for you and your region.
Hmm. Okay. So from what you're telling me, the main reasons why the league continue working, and maybe the main struggles that you find in the way were getting buy-in from all the teams and all the teams wanting to push forward with the league, and then being able to have enough referees for running the league, right? So right now, how many referees do you need to run, like for example, this current season?
Okay, so we want to have four ref. We want to have the way our schedule is set up. We want to make sure that referees aren't refereeing more than 3 games a day. Again,
Hmm.
knock on wood, ideal world. So we're aiming for, in general, 4 to 5 referees per each match day. If you were to say want to go in a fully local development
Hmm.
and try and build referees in each match day city, at most you would need, say, 20, 25 refs. But since there are referees that want to travel, want to be involved, want to try and get me to institute a per diem into the league structure,
Hmm.
then you can maybe get by with 8 to 10 as long as they are committed to making the match days and that they are available.
Okay. And so, how many teams do you have right now in the league?
Let's see, we have 7.5 in D1. We have 4 in D2. And the women's division, I believe we have 9 technically. So I'll just say 20 there.
20. So roughly, like you need at least one referee per team, right? To have the league going. Maybe
One
less
ref
than. Yeah.
yeah, one referee per team would be about a good parameter there to have. Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. And but you said the league when it started it was just four teams, right? So as long as you have four teams nearby, in distance that you can travel in a few hours, you could be able to start a league on this format, right?
Yeah, yeah. I believe when I wrote together a white paper and I sent it off to Flint and Detroit. I mentioned now how you really need 4 teams
Yeah.
to try and make something like this work. You can do it with 3, but that gets a little boring quickly,
Yeah.
unfortunately.
Right.
But yeah, 4 teams who are able to buy in and commit and travel to each other with relative ease makes all the difference.
Okay, sounds good. And can you tell us a little bit about the current standing of the league? Like where in the season are we now, and who's leading, who's still had to play games, all that fun.
Oh yeah. Let's see. So I'm currently getting text messages from the facility manager for DC's match day and match day 5. Hopefully, I'll be able to announce that very imminently. We've completed 2 match days this season on and D1 in the women's division, and we've completed everything except the final event for D2 Mid-Atlantic. I guess that's what we're calling it this season. In D2 Mid-Atlantic, DC Ambassadors are in first place. James Madison B is in second place. And then you have Virginia and Johns Hopkins. In the women's division, you have DC and Carolina as the 2 undefeated teams in the league right now.
Nice.
Uh, DC was able to beat New York City women by 1 at the last match day in November. You've also got Army West Point Black and Philly and Gold and Rams, which is Carolina's not JV, not varsity team, all in the mix as well. And
Okay.
then D1, New York City's undefeated. I don't know what you're expecting. New York Athletic Club is undefeated as well. They had a close victory over Army West Point Gold and a victory over DC as well. Uh, Boston's doing pretty well in the league right now, although they did tie Gold, Army West Point Gold. DC had some injuries, so they did not have the best second match day in the history of DC Diplomats history. And you have Army West Point Black needing a little bit of work, but not in panic mode right
All
now.
right. All right. So, and when were the 2 match days? You said the last one was in November. When was the previous one?
It was the days all go together now.
Yeah.
The second match day was the weekend of the 23rd of November,
And the first
and the
one?
first the weekend of 26 October.
October. Okay. Okay. And when is the next one?
Next one, well, it should be either later this month or early next month. I'm just waiting to get the final confirmation from that gym. In fact, once this call is over, I'm actually going to call the person responsible for that and see if they've got an update for me.
Okay. And for people that would like to follow this league, is there a way for them to see all the stats, who's winning, like the schedule, and is there any live stream information that they can access?
Live stream, no,
Okay.
because we're not happy with our setup yet. I
Okay.
don't want to put out a setup that I don't like. And I'm pretty particular about my setups. I was a film major,
Mm.
not my primary major. Uh, and then you also have our deputy commissioner, Chris Braze, who works in video production for the New York Jets,
Okay.
previously worked in MLS and MLB. We want to make sure that our live stream is great before it's available.
Okay.
Um, we do have multiple people each match day filming video on Instagram Live. So if you follow the club information, you should be able to find the Instagram live videos. For
Okay.
all that, you can follow us on the Instagram. That's our primary method of social media communication. That is Northeast NTHL League on Instagram, I believe.
Okay.
If you want to see the results, we keep those in the Club Hub and we also report those to USATH. The feed is not fully set up yet on our website, northeasthandball.com. Some issues with some of the WordPress modules that are in use,
Mm-hmm.
and but hopefully we'll get that on there soon so you can follow along in real time and you don't need to access my spreadsheets to see everything.
Okay. Okay. So if people want to follow then the league, they can go to the website. They have information there, or follow the Instagram page then.
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. And for anybody that would like to join the league, how can they do that? Any team that hasn't participated yet, but they think they can put together a team, or they're nearby and they can join the league. How do they do that?
Send us a DM, email me, Brian at northeasthandball.com, Brian at dcdiplomats.com, Brian at dchandball.com. You can pick your pick, Brian at bryancothorn.com.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of emails. And yeah, if otherwise, you can just reach out to the clubs closest to you that are in the league and let them know that you want to get involved. And in the end, we all talk to each other. So we'll all get that information and we'll all see what can be done and where things stand.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Brian, for your time and telling the community about the league and the rich history that the league has. And hope to see you in nationals this year.
Hopefully.
All right.
Just waiting for the announcement.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.